"With all due respect, Pops, you couldn't even see the target, let alone hit it. Why don't you go back to sweeping the floors before you hurt yourself?" The words, sharp and dripping with condescension, cut through the dry desert air, followed by a chorus of snickers from the younger Marines. The old man, his back stooped from decades of unseen burdens, simply nodded, his pale blue eyes betraying nothing. He had heard worse. He had endured worse. But in that moment, standing on the edge of a world he once commanded, the sting of dismissal felt as sharp as any bullet. If you believe that true strength is not always seen and that honor is earned for a lifetime, comment respect below. His name was Arthur Pendelton, but to the personnel at the Twentynine Palms Marine Corps Base, he was just Art, the quiet septuagenarian who volunteered to keep the advanced sniper range tidy. He'd arrive before dawn in his beat-up Ford Ranger, the engine rattling like a can of loose bolts. His clothes were worn but clean, faded denim jeans and a threadbare flannel shirt, no matter the blistering California heat. He moved with a slow, deliberate shuffle, his hands gnarled by arthritis, his face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by sun and time. He'd sweep up spent brass casings, patch target stands, and ensure the observation deck was clear of debris. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his voice was a soft, gravelly whisper, easily lost in the wind. The young, elite scout snipers saw him as a piece of the landscape, a harmless old ghost haunting the edges of their world of high-tech scopes and ballistic calculations. They didn't know that Arthur's ghost had walked through valleys of fire they could only read about in history books, that his eyes, now clouded with age, had once seen with a clarity that could decide the fate of 100 men from a mile away. He was content in his anonymity, finding a strange peace in the familiar scent of cordite and the distant crack of a high-velocity round, echoes of a life he had locked away. The day began like any other. The sun beat down on the range, creating shimmering heat hazes that distorted the distant targets. A group of the Corps' best young snipers were gathered for a special qualification test. A new target had been placed at a staggering 2,500 yards, a distance considered nearly impossible for the standard-issue M40A6 rifle. It was a challenge designed to push the absolute limits of skill and technology. One by one, the confident young marksmen took their positions. Corporal Davies, a broad-shouldered Marine with a swagger that matched his impressive record, was the group's informal leader. He adjusted his state-of-the-art scope, ran his calculations, and exuded an aura of invincibility. Arthur watched from the shade of the small utility shed, leaning on his broom. He wasn't just sweeping, he was observing. He saw the slight miscalculation for the spin drift, the failure to fully account for the mirage that danced like water in the heat. He saw the tension in their shoulders, the ego that tightened their trigger finger just a fraction too much. Crack. The first shot missed wide. Crack. The second, from another sniper, kicked up dust a few feet low. Davies was last. He took a deep breath, his spotter calling out wind adjustments. The rifle bucked against his shoulder. A long second passed before the call came back from the target cam. Mississippi. No impact. A collective groan of frustration went through the group. Davies cursed under his breath, his face flushing with anger. "The wind's a ghost out there," he muttered. "It's an impossible shot. Equipment's not rated for this." From the edge of the concrete pad, Arthur's quiet voice drifted over. "Wind's not the ghost," he said almost to himself. "You're reading the mirage wrong. It's flowing left to right, but there's an undertow. You have to aim into it, not with it." Every head snapped in his direction. Davies turned, his eyes narrowing. "What did you say, old man?" he asked, his voice laced with venom. Arthur didn't flinch. He just looked at the distant target, his gaze far away. "I said you're letting the heat fool you, and you're breathing, you're holding on the exhale. You need to break the shot at the natural respiratory pause. You're fighting your own body." The condescending laughter started then. It was sharp and cruel. "Oh, we got a regular gunnery Sergeant Hathcock over here." One of the Marines jeered, referencing the legendary Vietnam sniper. "Art, the janitor, is going to teach us how to shoot." Davies stalked over to him, puffing his chest out. He towered over the stooped old man. With all due respect, Pops, you couldn't even see the target, let alone hit it. Why don't you go back to sweeping the floors before you hurt yourself? Arthur's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He held the younger man's gaze, his pale eyes suddenly as hard as chipped ice. For a moment, the frail old man vanished, replaced by something ancient and dangerous. I've seen it, Arthur said, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight. And I've hit it. Davies let out a laugh of pure disbelief. Is that so? From a VFW barstool? Come on, guys, let's pack it up. The expert has spoken. The mockery was a physical force, pressing in on Arthur. He had promised himself he would stay invisible, that he would leave the past buried. But the smell of the powder, the arrogance of youth, the casual dismissal of a lifetime of sacrifice, it cracked something deep inside him. Give me the rifle, Arthur said. The words were so unexpected, so utterly absurd, that the laughter died in their throats. There was only silence, broken by the whistling wind. Davies stared at him, a smirk playing on his lips. This was too good to pass up. You want to shoot? Be my guest, Grandpa. Let's see what you've got. He gestured theatrically towards the firing line. Show us how it's done. A tense, mocking energy filled the air as Arthur shuffled forward. The Marines parted for him, some barely containing their smirks, others just looking on with a kind of morbid curiosity. Davies thrust the heavy M40 rifle into his hands. The weight, nearly 17 pounds with the scope, should have been too much for the old man's frail frame, but Arthur's hands accepted it with a familiarity that was unsettling. He didn't cradle it like a piece of equipment. He held it like an extension of his own body. He walked to the firing mat and, with a soft groan of effort, lowered himself into the prone position. The movement was slow, stiff with age, but once he was down, a transformation began. The way he settled his body behind the rifle, the way he adjusted the bipod, the way his left hand curled under the stock to build a stable platform. It was all done with an economy of motion that spoke of infinite repetition. It was muscle memory buried under 60 years of civilian life, now reawakening. Davies stood over him, arms crossed. Need help finding the trigger, old-timer? Arthur ignored him. He closed his eyes for a long moment, and in the darkness, the faces of boys younger than Davies flashed before him. Ghosts in jungle fatigues, whispering encouragement from a lifetime ago. He took a single, slow breath, and the slight tremor in his hands vanished. They became as still as granite. He opened his eyes and peered through the high-powered scope. The world dissolved into a magnified circle of shimmering heat. The range master, a gunnery sergeant who had been watching the spectacle with a mix of pity and annoyance, walked over with his logbook. Sir, I can't let you fire without logging your name. Arthur didn't take his eye from the scope. He seemed to be in another world, another time. Name? The gunny repeated, more forcefully. Without looking up, the old man spoke the name he hadn't used on a military firing line in over half a century. His voice was a low whisper, meant only for the logbook, but in a sudden lull in the wind, it carried. Pendelton. Arthur, at that exact moment. A black sedan with government plates had pulled up to the observation tower. Out stepped a man wearing the single star of a brigadier general on his collar. He was there to observe the trials, having heard about the new impossible distance. As he approached the firing line, he overheard the name. General Miller stopped dead in his tracks. His face, usually a mask of stern authority, went pale. He stared at the old man lying on the mat. What did he say his name was? Miller asked the rangemaster, his voice sharp. The gunny, surprised by the general's sudden appearance, stammered. Pendelton, sir. Arthur Pendelton. General Miller's breath caught in his throat. He strode past the stunned Corporal Davies, his eyes locked on the prone figure. The young Marines, seeing the general, snapped to a semblance of attention, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm. Miller ignored them completely. He knelt beside the old man, his movements filled with a reverence that shocked everyone present. The air grew thick with unspoken questions. Specter, General Miller asked, his voice barely a whisper. The name hung in the air, alien and potent. Arthur slowly turned his head away from the scope, his pale blue eyes meeting the general's. A flicker of recognition, of shared history, passed between them. A sad, knowing smile touched Arthur's lips. "Just art now, Jimmy," he rasped. "Just art." General Miller shook his head, his eyes shining with emotion. He stood up and turned to face the dumbfounded group of snipers. His voice, when he spoke, was not the bark of a commander, but the solemn tone of a historian revealing a sacred text. "You stand here on this range and you call yourselves scout snipers," he began, his gaze sweeping over their faces, landing with force on Corporal Davies. "You have the best equipment, the best training, the best intelligence the Marine Corps can provide. And you think you know what impossible is?" He pointed a trembling finger at the old man on the ground. "This is Arthur Pendelton. But in the winter of 1968, at the siege of Kisan, they called him Specter. Because he was a ghost who haunted the North Vietnamese army from ridges they thought were unreachable." The general's voice grew stronger, filled with a fiery pride. "This man doesn't need your fancy computers to calculate windage. He learned to read the mirage in a jungle so thick with heat and fear it would make you boys weep. He didn't have a spotter with a radio. He had a partner with a pair of binoculars and a prayer. The shot you just attempted? 2,500 yards? In '68, with a modified Winchester Model 70 and a scope that was little better than a toy, Specter made a confirmed kill at 2,734 yards. A shot that was classified for 40 years. A shot that, to this day, officially never happened." He wrote the book on long-range engagements. He is the book. The silence was absolute. The desert wind seemed to hold its breath. Corporal Davies' face had drained of all color. The arrogance, the swagger, it all melted away, replaced by a profound, gut-wrenching shame. He looked at the old janitor, this quiet, stooped man, and saw him for the first time. A titan hidden in plain sight. Arthur turned his attention back to the rifle. The world outside the scope ceased to exist. There was only the reticle, the shimmering air, and the distant, tiny square of steel. He wasn't Arthur the janitor anymore. He was Specter. His mind was a silent, perfect calculator. He saw the undertow in the mirage the general had spoken of. He felt the whisper of the Coriolis effect trying to pull the bullet east. He factored in the barometric pressure, the humidity, the slight droop of the barrel from the relentless sun. He adjusted the elevation knob with a series of precise clicks, his gnarled fingers moving with an impossible grace. Then he adjusted for windage, aiming not at the target, but at a patch of empty air several feet to the left of it. The young Marines watched, mesmerized. This wasn't the fumbling of an old man. It was the ritual of a high priest. He let out half a breath, found the bottom of his exhale, and entered the natural respiratory pause. The world went still. His finger, which had been resting on the side of the trigger guard, moved to the trigger. There was no hesitation, no tension. There was only a slow, steady, inexorable squeeze. It was a movement of pure purpose, honed by 1,000 moments just like this one, moments where life and death hung on that single patient press. The rifle roared, a blast of sound that seemed to suck all the air from the range. The recoil kicked the barrel up, but Arthur's body absorbed it perfectly, allowing him to see the vapor trail of the bullet as it screamed across the desert. For 3 long seconds, the tiny projectile carved its path through the air, fighting wind and gravity. Then, a sound returned across the immense distance. Not the dull thud of a miss hitting the dirt berm, but a sharp, unmistakable ping. It was a sound of pure, impossible perfection. On the monitor connected to the target camera, the image was undeniable. Dead center. A perfect bullseye on a target no one else could touch. A wave of stunned silence washed over the onlookers, followed by a collective, involuntary gasp. General Miller stared, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. Corporal Davies just stood there, his mouth agape, his world completely and irrevocably shattered and rebuilt in the space of a single heartbeat. Arthur slowly pushed himself up, the fire in his eyes receding, the ghost retreating back into the shell of the old man. He handed the rifle back to Davies, who took it as if it were a holy relic. The corporal's hands were trembling. He couldn't meet Arthur's eyes. He just stared at the rifle, then at the hole in the distant target, then back at the old man. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Finally, he straightened his back, clicked his heels together, and rendered the sharpest, most sincere salute of his life. "Corporal Davies," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I apologize, sir. For my disrespect." Arthur simply gave a slow nod of acceptance. He didn't need the apology, but he understood the boy needed to give it. One by one, the other young snipers, their faces etched with awe and shame, followed their corporal's lead, each offering a salute to the quiet janitor. General Miller put a hand on Arthur's shoulder. "They'll be telling this story for years." Specter. Arthur just shook his head. "Let them tell it about the Corps. Not about me." The events of that day sent ripples through the entire base. Corporal Davies was never the same. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet humility and a ferocious dedication to his craft, born from the knowledge that he had stood in the presence of living history. He was seen more than once seeking out Arthur, not with mockery, but with a notebook and a humble request to listen. The story of the old janitor who broke the range record became a base legend, a cautionary tale whispered to new recruits about judging a man by his cover. Arthur Pendelton went back to his quiet life. He still arrived before dawn in his rattling truck, still swept the brass, still moved like a ghost at the edge of their world. But he was no longer invisible. Now, when he shuffled past, the young, proud Marines would subtly straighten their posture. They would nod their heads. They would greet him not as Art, but as Mr. Pendelton. Their voices filled with a reverence once reserved for generals and heroes from books. They finally understood that some heroes don't wear their medals on their chests. They carry them silently, in the steady calm of their hands and the far-off look in their eyes. The greatest monuments are not made of stone, but of quiet, enduring respect. True honor never fades. It just waits patiently to be seen again. If you believe every veteran deserves our unwavering respect, subscribe to this channel. Share this story if you know someone who embodies the spirit of a quiet hero.